What is going on, everyone? Anthony here, and welcome back to another video here on Let's Talk Resident Evil. And in this video, I want to take a look back into the past when I started collecting Resident Evil and when it really became part of me growing up and just collecting in general, I think. And I thought it would be cool to go back and take a look into the early 2000s when a lot of this started for me. And, I'm younger than some of you watching this channel or my videos, so different eras of gamers obviously gravitate to different things that they want to collect, right? So for me, I had a bunch of PlayStation 1 games that were pretty much left to me when my dad would go to just PlayStation 2. He really wouldn't look back and play many PS1 games at that point, so I was left with just like a bunch of PS1 games to check out. And so that's I was around it when he was still playing the PlayStation 1, but in the fall of 2000, when the PlayStation 2 came out, everybody was on the PS2, and so was I, but it wasn't my console. It was a console that was hooked up, where his TV was in the living room and stuff like that. So obviously I had access to the PS1. The Dreamcast was, something that me and Nick would play. That's my brother. And, we'd play that. We'd play the GameCube and later the Xbox, the original Xbox. So like the PS2 was kind of his. And I got my own PS2 in like 2003, 2004, kind of right in that time frame. So probably 2003. That lines up more correctly with the games that I had. But yeah, so going back in looking at Resident Evil being a, major piece of this channel, obviously. And for the last 15 years, I've been documenting every single piece that has come into my collection. And that was just kind of an idea that I had that I thought would be a cool concept, just to kind of look back, now 15 years of videos to be like, wow, like this is how much I got a game for. And it was like $10 and now it's over $200. How did that happen? What happened? Right. But before we got into all of that, before YouTube was even around, I obviously was left with the original Resident Evils from my dad's just personal collection. And for me, my introduction to Resident Evil, and this is a very sentimental disc here, and it's very scratched up, it's seen better days, is the first copy of Resident Evil that I've ever played. And it doesn't have a case. It didn't even have a case back then. I don't know what my dad did with the case. I don't even know if he had the long box or the slim case. I don't even know if he remembers at this point. But regardless, this was the introduction to Resident Evil. Seeing this disc with this eye, with the blood dripping down, is like burned into my brain as far as, just what this was. And, I remember that we also had this because my dad purchased this. And this is Resident Evil Director's Cut. It still has the label on the top too, which is kind of cool. But Resident Evil Director's Cut DualShock Editions. This is the edition that changed the music that a lot of people weren't happy with, but this came out after the fact. Now, my dad bought this not knowing that it really was like the first game all over again, so I don't think he ever really played it. So I keep the Resident Evil 1 disc in this case as well, just so I have it for like the memory purposes, of course. Now, this is a scratched up disc, so it probably doesn't run very well. I haven't tried to actually run it in a while. I think at some point it would just freeze and stop working, so Director's Cut was actually the copy that I played a little bit more of at the time. Now, I didn't even know the Resident Evil 2 demo edition of this was even out. I didn't have it. So I didn't even have this until years later, like 2008, 2009, when I started shopping on eBay and like I would start getting stuff, This wasn't even in the picture. So it was literally just this disc, Resident Evil Director's Cut. That was it for my baseline RE1. And my dad had the RE Director's Cut strategy guide as well. And that's also, what I would use to try to learn the game, try to get through the game. And there was also this version too. I don't actually have the manual for this, but this is actually a slim case version of this, which not a lot of people know about. And this was a standalone release like this one, but it was not the DualShock Director's Cut. It was just the Director's Cut, if you could believe that. So, as you see on the back, well, the top piece came off here. I guess it's didn't clip in all the way, but there you go. It's just that. So, it's actually a more rare version. It's like a variant of Director's Cut. It's a little bit more rare. So I have it. I just don't have the manual. So I doubt I'll ever be able to find the manual for this by itself. So I might have to rebuy it to get the, to get it. But again, these weren't in the scenario. I didn't get these until way later, right? So that's what we had. We had Director's Cut. We had Resident Evil 1, the original, no case. Resident Evil 2, another one that my dad picked up with the Prima Perfect Guide strategy guide. And this was the original copy. This is the original copy. It does have the discs both in here. You got Claire, you got Leon, and the manual. So this one actually stayed intact for whatever reason. Who knows? Back then, we were kids. We used to get into stuff, and, I don't know if it was something we ruined on him because we did get into, like, CDs and crap, and we would mess stuff up when we were younger. It just happened in the late 90s. What are you going to do? I was young as hell. I wasn't, I wasn't thinking, basically. But many of the PS1 games, believe it or not, did survive, even if some had to be, repurchased or bought over again. And of course, as you guys know, Resident Evil 3. So this is my original copy of Resident Evil 3. Same thing, just in a case that's a single disc. So this isn't the Dino Crisis demo disc version. I would get that later. But yeah, same thing. This is pretty, banged up. Like, it does play, but it has seen, some better days. But yeah, so Resident Evil 3, a very just nostalgic game, my favorite game of all time. This was really the Resident Evil I really started playing because the easy mode was easy. So I would go back and forth and play Resident Evil 1, this is 2, Resident Evil 2, Resident Evil 1, right, Director's Cut. But this one I found I was getting, a little bit further in because obviously the easy mode was very forgiving. Now, if I had the DualShock Resident Evil 2, which I also didn't have at the time, I have now, that had rookie mode in it that gave you a rocket launcher from the beginning. If I had that, I probably would have played through Resident Evil 2. But again, he had the strategy guide for this one. And Nemesis is, like, the best. And that is burned into my brain as, like, watching him play that game. So I pretty much watched him play all of these games through the years. But this one was when I really started to remember, and start to gain memories of gaming. So it was right around here where it really started for me. And maybe that's also the reason why it plays into just everything wrapped up in this game is what I love about Resident Evil. And to this day, going back and playing it, it's one thing if I went back and played it and, some things aren't the same as you remember them, but this actually is the same, if not even better, because once you learn how to play it and you know what you're doing, it just kind of amplified a lot of these games for me. So these were in my collection. And what was also in my collection, which I think this actually made my dad stop buying Resident Evil for a while because he didn't know what they were actually doing with the series or the franchise. And that's Resident Evil Survivor. So I remember when he got this, and it was in 2000, and he popped it in, and he didn't realize it was first person. And at the time, nowadays he plays Call of Duty just fine. But at the time, he would get, motion sickness from games like Doom on the Genesis and stuff like that. So he probably could have gotten away with playing this without getting, motion sickness, but I think he just immediately was like, I don't even want to play it. So he never played this. Like, he played it, but, never fully beat it or anything. So I would go in and try to play it, and I was always confused as to why there wasn't a typewriter and there was only continues and stuff like that because I played the other one. So Survivor is another game that, he bought the strategy guide for. I still have the strategy guides. I'm going to do a whole separate video on just the strategy guides, by the way. But yeah, this is this just has, a very unique charm to it because it's just one that he did not like. And he didn't buy Resident Evil for years after this because all the games that I was playing on the GameCube and the Dreamcast, he didn't play on those consoles. So I was experiencing a whole nother era of Resident Evil while he was on the PS2. And then he did play RE4, the original, but he didn't really even get into that either, when that came out on the PS2 in the fall of '05. So, so Survivor, another one that was in my collection at the time. So as we got into the early 2000s, of course, the Dreamcast was, already big at the time, and we got Code Veronica on the Dreamcast. Again, another original copy here. This one has the double disc because it was a, long game. So you got both discs there. Again, seeing this for the first time on the Dreamcast, like I said, me and my brother had the Dreamcast. The graphics were insane. I mean, compared to what we were getting on the PlayStation, I mean, Dreamcast was, again, that in-between in that 2000, 99 to 2000. That was my memory of getting the Dreamcast, playing this, playing Mortal Kombat Gold, playing Crazy Taxi, stuff like that. But this really was before we got the PS2. Again, never really finished it when I was younger. It was a hard game. This is one of the Resident Evils that I definitely would have benefited from the strategy guide, considering how hard it was. So it's kind of funny that this is the one that I didn't get the strategy guide for. But sometimes you can afford it, sometimes you can't. You know what I mean? We wouldn't get new games all the time. I know I talk about having a lot of these consoles growing up, which was great, but it's not like we could afford new games all the time. You know what I mean? So again, rentals were a huge thing for me, video store rentals and stuff like that, trying stuff out before you buy it or trying it out until you find an inevitable price drop on stuff like that. But again, very, very cool time, to play Resident Evil. And again, we got the GameCube and stuff like that, and it was quiet at first. I was like, okay, didn't know about the Resident Evil, the deal that was going on at the time. I would read the game magazines that were coming in, Game Informer, Electronic Gaming Monthly, all that stuff that we were subscribed to. But I didn't know what was going on with Resident Evil. If there were going to be a million, ports and a million, I didn't know. I just was like, oh, this is another one that's coming out. You would go to the store and you would see something new. So in the early 2000s, 2001, I believe this port came out. And this was Resident Evil Code Veronica X. This is actually from Hometown Video. Shout out Hometown. This actually came with the main game, and it came with the Devil May Cry demo. And I bought this at the video store. So they had a little section, a little shelf to the right of the register, and you could buy certain games that were, they were getting rid of them or they're clearing out space. And so probably bought this for $8, $9, something like that. And as you notice, it's the 5th anniversary of Resident Evil on the top there. Thought that was funny. But so played Code Veronica, realized, okay, it's the same thing, but it just has the extra cutscenes and stuff like that. But again, played through it for a little bit, but again, not very good at it, so didn't get very far. And again, another one that was in my collection, so that it went. And then we get into the GameCube era. So we had a GameCube, and I remember going into the Echelon Mall. That's a mall that is in South Jersey that is now a dead mall. It's open, but it's very dead. And, I still sometimes get a little nostalgic, and if I go in there and reminisce a little bit, it's completely not what it used to be. And I feel like most malls are like that now. But that was the mall. That was before we started to go to different malls and different outlets and stuff and GameStops. Going there every Friday or Saturday with the family. You'd always have to go to Borders Books to look at the anime stuff or the Resident Evil novels and stuff like that, or Sam Goody or Suncoast Video. The list goes on. But GameStop, it used to be Babbage's in there, and then EB Games was upstairs. So this was in the GameStop that was downstairs. And I remember, didn't even know it was out. I saw this on the shelf, Resident Evil Remake. And I was like, it's just called Resident Evil. That's so, strange. That doesn't really, what is this? Is this just another game, like the first game again, but on GameCube? And I look on the back, and I'll never forget seeing Jill in the dining room. And I remember going up to my parents. I'm like, there's Resident Evil over there, but it's not the same Resident Evil. It's a different one. And eventually, we would get it. And this was the first Resident Evil that I think really did scare the shit out of me. You know, like the realistic graphics, the music, I mean, the atmosphere. This was like, again, Resident Evil 1 was just a completely different game than what I remember it on the PlayStation at the time. So I was just like, okay, this is like really serious horror. And it's another game that I didn't really finish until like a few years later. But initially when I played it, it was challenging. I didn't know where to go. I didn't know what to do. Everything was different. It wasn't a beat for beat like the original. So I went into this thinking, okay, if I know what to do in the first game or director's cut, I could play through this. Nope. It was harder at the time for me. But eventually I would finish it, and it would become, still to this day, my favorite remake of all time. And the same exact year, we got Resident Evil 0. And Resident Evil 0 was another one. I was like, holy crap, like, they're expanding the lore. They're expanding the story. Now, unfortunately, these two right here, these two copies, I'm going to be honest with you, these are not my original copies. These have been rebought because at the time, again, like I said, when you would have to afford games or you want new stuff, we would have a bad habit of trading in some games during this PS2, GameCube, Xbox era. So I don't even have all of my GameCube collection anymore because a lot of it has been traded in or was traded in back in the day. So I do have the strategy guide for this still, the original strategy guide. I don't have a strategy guide for this, but both of these have been repurchased. Like when they finally dropped prices, I would pick them up and get them back in my collection. So these two were added in my collection actually way back in the day, like probably going back 20 years at this point, because I was like, no, I want them back in my collection. I know I sold them for a certain time. Have you guys ever done that, like sold a game because you just wanted to play something else, but then you knew, like, I'm coming back. I'm getting this fucking game when it drops price. So that happened. A few years later, I would get the ports for GameCube, like Resident Evil 2, 3, and Code Veronica, but they were not in my collection at that time. So I'm not showing them here because I'm just kind of showing all the copies that were in my collection at the time. So this next one was another game that I bought and then eventually traded in and then rebought again. I didn't really like it. Could you really blame me? Resident Evil Dead Aim. It's not the worst game I've ever played, but it's not a very good game. I actually liked Survivor more than this back then, and to this day, I like Survivor more than this, just because, the save room theme is cool. I actually like some of the atmosphere bits on the boat. It is a little creepy at times, but not like, again, it's just the voice acting's bad. The characters are bad. It's like a bootleg Leon and Ada, basically. I didn't know that this game even came out, and then I was like, oh, Dead Aim, what the hell's Dead Aim? Bought it on the PS2. And it was just not a very, redeeming game. It just didn't really, justify the purchase. So eventually I traded it in, bought it back later in, 2010. I actually have a collection update that shows me buying this again on the channel. So it's on the playlist, so you can go back and check it out. It was probably 15 years ago, 14, 15 years ago at this point. But another one that was in my collection at the time. And then, last but not least, because we'll kind of cut it off here, Resident Evil 4 for the GameCube. And that brings us up to about 2005. So, 20 years ago, this was in my collection with a strategy guide. So in the early to mid-2000s, I also picked up Resident Evil Gaiden or Gaiden, however you want to pronounce it. It's another, unique game that is rare and not a very great game, but it is very unique in and of itself. It has a cool soundtrack, but even that makes your ears bleed after a while. But that was another one that was hanging around in my collection. And like I said, though, between Resident Evil 4 and then Resident Evil Deadly Silence, which was in 2006 for the 10-year anniversary of Resident Evil, within the 10 years, I had a decent amount of Resident Evil. Not a lot, but I had a decent amount on my shelf. And all of these copies here, most of these are original. Some are rebought, but most of them are original. So they definitely hold a certain sentimental value to me. And these being in my collection really started everything else that I wanted to collect. You know what I mean? So it really was not only a start of my Resident Evil collection journey, but just collecting stuff in general, realizing the value of certain things, taking care of stuff, putting it back in the case, stuff like that. Even the movies I wouldn't collect until like years down the road. I would see them when they would come out, but and rent them on videotape or DVD. But even they weren't in my collection until years later, a couple years later. So once I started to take it seriously a little bit more, I would go out and try to seek the other ports and the other stuff that, like, even though I had them, like the Dreamcast ports and stuff like that, I would see a lot of this stuff in the store. And I was just like, it's another $40, it's another $50. Like, you know, they're not going to let me get this because I already own it, right? And there's one more that I forgot, actually. There's one more Resident Evil that I forgot that will wrap up this video. Now, in that same mall, like I said, the Echelon Mall, this was about 2001, 2002. You know, we had a Dell computer, good old Windows XP Dell, and I wanted to get Resident Evil 3 on the PC. Was a hard sell on my dad because, again, it was another $40. And, you know, I remember back in the day, they had the wall in the back that had all the big-ass PC boxes. It had Diablo 1 and 2. It had, you know, all these other games that were just in these big boxes. And I remember I saw Resident Evil 3, and I saw the big box, and I was like, holy shit, this looks awesome. And it's on PC. Like, we have a PC, right? We could play it. So unfortunately, I don't have the big box anymore. I don't know what happened to it. I really couldn't tell you. It could still be somewhere in the attic, somewhere hidden away. But unfortunately, I don't even have the jewel case for this thing anymore. I keep it in a jewel case with a backup CD-ROM of the game, believe it or not. But it's Resident Evil 3 on the PC. I made this case years ago, and it's still in it. But this is all I have left from it. Is just the disc, and that was also in my collection, but it was on the PC, and it looked great. It was the best version of Resident Evil 3 I ever played, and I was like, what? You can play mercenaries from the start? You can select costumes from the start? This is fucking awesome. And that it was, but it was another game that I had to convince my dad, like, oh no, but this is on PC, it's different, you know? And yeah, I just remember really playing the PC version of Resident Evil 3 and getting further and further into it, actually. You know, so at the time, I really was playing the PS1 version, but also the PC version of 3 was really cool. So I have the big box of 2. I don't have the big box of 3, so maybe one day I'll get that back. It goes for a lot of money. I'm talking $600, $700, $800 sometimes, so very expensive. But also, yes, the PC version of 3 was also the last addition to my collection. But Resident Evil 3 on PC was a really good port at the time, so I enjoyed the hell out of it. So, yeah, so that's it. So thank you guys so much for watching this video. That is my, you know, early collection of Resident Evil games that really started this whole journey of getting into Resident Evil, loving Resident Evil, you know, playing all the games. Like, there was stuff like Outbreak and stuff like that that I rented back in the day, you know, in 05, 04, 05, that, like, I rented it and I was just like, I'm not really into it, you know, and I didn't get it right there and then. I got it later, you know. Now Outbreak is a fantastic game because you can play it online with the fan mods and stuff like that. You can really see what that game was intended to do with fan mods, but back then playing it single player was not it for me. So there were some games that I would rent from the video store and I was just like, I'll pass on this. I probably should have did that with stuff like Dead Aim and stuff like that, but they didn't even have all those games sometimes. Sometimes they had, you know, other titles, sometimes they didn't, you know, they would swap in and out of what they had. But yeah, guys, so that just kind of gives you an insight as to my early days of childhood collecting, understanding like how to take care of games, and, you know, really just like build on other franchises. Again, same thing with like your Twisted Metals, your Siphon Filters. Like, I would try to find, you know, all the different stuff that my dad didn't have in the collection already. So again, very just cool, warm memories, and I thought it would be cool to explain some of the, you know, memories attached to some of these games, when playing them for the first time or picking them up from the store. And, let me know some of your Resident Evil memories. If you have a collection, what was some of your early days of collecting? How was that? And did you get rid of stuff? Did you have to repurchase stuff because you didn't know what you had back when you were younger? That happens to a lot of us collectors, you know. But, yeah, so let me know down below. Hit that like button and subscribe if you're new. And we have a couple other videos coming up and more content on the way. So Stay tuned, and I will catch all of you in the next one.